Good day. Today I want to talk about horsemanship. You see, for many years I've had my own idea of what the definition of horsemanship was, but turns out I wasn't exactly right. Well, I am, but I'm not. I even did a video on it years ago. I explained what I believed good horsemanship was, or horsemanship in general. But I kind of got curious, and well, I'm always open to finding out what's really going on. I don't want to just believe what I believe. So I actually started looking up the definition of horsemanship, and I didn't just go with one definition. I actually looked up several dictionary definitions of the word horsemanship. And I was rather surprised at the definition. It wasn't exactly what I thought good horsemanship was, but it also explained a lot of things and why people have so much trouble because almost every single definition that I came across was pretty much the same. No surprise, because it was like the Oxford, the Webster's, Britannica, all these reputable dictionaries that have their own definition of things. And their definition focused almost exclusively on riding, and I'm just going to briefly paraphrase what pretty much they all said is horsemanship is the ability to control a horse with the least amount of effort. Well, there is some truth to that. It's not entirely wrong, but there's so much more to it than so much more to horsemanship than riding. I think that's probably one of the sources of a lot of problems for people is they get so focused on the riding that they forget about what horsemanship really entails. Well, at least my definition, and my definition is kind of based on all the things I've seen in life, uh, different skills and different crafts and different professions. I'll give you a couple of examples. Well, with the horsemanship definition, they focus pretty much exclusively on riding and your ability to control the horse, which, well, that's another thing that I think is a problem too, is they use that word control. And people hate being out of control, so they think that in order to be a good horseman, they have to be in control of that horse. They have to have control. They become control freaks, and they don't understand. Well, I'll get to it in a minute, but um, for example, a sailor. Well, there's a lot more to being a sailor than just steering a ship. You got to understand the currents and the tides, and you have to know a lot about navigation and be able to do it well. And you have to understand weather, things like that. I mean, there's just so much more to being a sailor than just hopping on a ship and steering it. And well, another example would be, say, a woodworker, a good carpenter. They're craftsmen, finishing carpenters. I actually helped a guy years ago with a couple projects that involved some rather exotic woods that I knew nothing about, but I did a little reading about them, and I found some really interesting facts about the woods that we were working with and why we were having some of the problems we were having. Because being a good carpenter isn't just about running a saw, a drill, a plane, a sander, things like that. You have to understand the wood you're working with, too, in order to be able to work with it effectively. Again, it's not just running a planer, running a saw, drilling holes. A whole lot more to it than that. And myself, I've had a lot of experience over the years operating different types of machinery, different sizes. And there's lots of guys that probably were better at it than me, but one of the things that made me reasonably good at what I did is I wasn't just an operator or a driver or whatever. I understood the machine that I was in control of and how it worked, so I could optimize the performance of it and use it better. It also helped when it came to problems with the equipment. I identified them before they became serious problems, and we could remedy them. Well, horsemanship is a lot like that too. It's not just about riding, because a lot of the problems that you'll have riding They've got very little to do with your riding methods and techniques, your posture, all this stuff. And I think that even when it comes to riding, the definition is way too narrow because it doesn't include anything about the tack, and it didn't really elaborate much on anything other than controlling the horse with the least amount of effort. I thought that was an extremely shallow definition, even of riding. And there's a lot of problems that people run into when the horse isn't performing the way they want to, and they just simply look at riding, how they're controlling the horse, the things that they're doing as a rider. And often could be poor fitting tack, could be a health issue or a behavioral issue, but the question is, why is the horse doing what it's doing? If you don't understand the animal, the tack, its environment, and when it comes to the animal, there is so much to understand from health, nutrition, the way it is kept. I tend to focus primarily on behavioral. That's my thing. Because when it comes to a horse, there is so much to know about horses that one person can't possibly know everything. Well, not even a little bit of everything. Actually, you can't even know a whole lot about even just one thing. It's been my experience, and something I've said, not just with horses, is that the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. And I think there's a lot of truth in that because as I learn more about horse behavior, I start realizing how much more there is to learn. And there's so many other things that can affect behavior too that you need to know a little bit about, hoof anatomy and mechanics and health. The hoof alone, there's an incredible wealth of information to know about that. Even one individual specializing in just that one part of the horse, they're not going to know it all. They might know half of it, 2/3 at best, I think. I know. And, when it comes to the health of the horse, the vet, I have to, I find it amusing. There's not long ago, I was a little bit stumped by a problem I was having, and I summoned my vet for his expertise in the area, and he was just as stumped as I was, so I didn't feel too bad about that one, but perfect example. Even when it comes to, the medical side of things, you can only know so much. It's really hard to know as much as you need to know. And then there's, the conformation, the breeding, the colors, the coats. Goodness sakes, there's just so much to know about horses. And to narrow it down to just horsemanship is riding? I'm sorry, that might be the dictionary definition, but it sure explains the problems a lot of people have if that's the definition of horsemanship that they have in their head. Because there's just so many other things involved that can affect your riding that have very little to do with the riding itself, but they can certainly affect the performance of your riding. So, what is horsemanship? Well, if you go by the dictionary, it is strictly your ability to ride, which in my opinion is a very, very, very small portion of what horsemanship is or should be. Horsemanship should be understanding the animal, its behavior, its health issue, all of its needs, whether it's nutrition or how it's kept. Do you or don't you blanket? Do you or don't you put shoes on? Do you or don't you use a bit, spurs? All these things all have an effect on the end result, which is your riding, if that's what your end result is. Personally, the more I get to know horses, the less I care if I ride. They're fascinating animals. They're a lot of fun to be with. I can get a lot of pleasure from being with horses because I've learned to understand them far beyond just the technical aspects of riding, because I don't believe that that's where horsemanship stops. No, not even close. In fact, like I said, riding is such a small portion of the horse. And you need to understand an awful lot more about the horse in order to be an effective rider even. So dictionary definitions, I mean, they all say the same thing. I checked quite a few, but I think I don't know, 4 or 5 of them, all the reputable ones, and they all said pretty much the same thing. And I'm afraid that I disagree. Okay, I'm not a linguist, a scholar in that respect. I can't alter the definition of the dictionaries. But I can say that to truly be a horseman, you need horsemanship, and the horsemanship that I believe you need far exceeds your ability to ride. It is an understanding of the horse, its behavior. And like I said, I specialize in the behavior, but I still also have to know a little bit about their nutritional needs, their health needs, hoof care, all this stuff. And even that, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg on those things. But I know enough to know when there's some things that are wrong that need to be addressed and taken care of, because in the end, it's going to affect the behavior of the horse when it's being ridden. Like I said, not that I really care whether or not I ride it, but, these are all factors that, factor into your riding. You want good horsemanship, and you want to keep it narrowed down to that dictionary definition of horsemanship is your ability to ride. Well, you're still going to have to know an awful lot more than what they talk about in the dictionary in order to be able to do that well. And I think that that's something that whoever came up with those definitions overlooked. They didn't understand why certain people are very skilled riders. It's not because of their technical ability as a rider. It's because they understand horses. They understand their needs emotionally, physically, nutritionally, how they're kept, how they're cared for, how they're treated. There's just so many things that go far beyond riding. So what's horsemanship? My definition or the dictionary's definition? Well, unfortunately, my definition isn't the dictionary definition, but it's the definition I do believe that people need to have. You want to have good horsemanship, you better learn to understand that animal, understand what it needs and how to care for it, how to keep it happy and healthy, all the things that are involved. I mean, man, that list, I could go on. It could be very, very long, but horsemanship, I'm sorry, I just don't look at don't look up the definition of that one in the dictionary. That's all I can say, because that is just a very, very narrow definition, a very small definition, and I think that your ability to ride, that's just a drop in the bucket of the things that you truly need to know. And going back to the the control thing, that one drives me nuts, because I think that causes a lot of anxiety in humans, which in turn causes anxiety in the horse, because horses do feed off of your emotions. There's no doubt about that. Not too many people will disagree with that one that know anything about horses anyhow. And because people think they need to be in control, if they don't feel 100% in control, they start getting this anxiety and nervous tension and stuff that it's going to affect their riding in more ways than one, because it's not only going to affect them personally and their ability to ride, but it's also going to affect the horse. So their fear of being out of control, which is kind of human nature, humans tend to fear being out of control all the time, it's going to have a huge effect. So, and if you treat that horse properly, look after its emotional needs, it's going to give you control. It's going to be willing to do whatever you ask it to do once it understands. They don't elaborate much in that department either, as far as, when you're cueing the horse. Does it actually even understand what you want? Is your problem with your riding really your technical abilities, or is the fact that you've never properly taught that horse in the first place what it is you're asking for? So, it's just, what is horsemanship, okay? I don't think it, no. The definition in the dictionary, I'm sorry, that's not even close to the whole picture. So, my little rant for the day, I guess, we'll say, is I think people that rely on things like dictionaries for their definition of things, you might end up in a whole lot of trouble, especially when it comes to horses, because horsemanship, what they list in the dictionary, that's a very, very tiny part of horsemanship. Horsemanship is doing everything. Well, at least a little bit of everything. Understanding the animal you're working with, how it thinks, how it feels, how it behaves, all the things involved, because you can't be an effective rider unless you know them. Take care and be a good horseman.